Ay, ay, ay. All right, everyone. Is it really our last lecture? Last but maybe least. Our last lecture, this is a bit of a spin-off, meaning it's a sort of development, but in a different direction. And that is because Professor Davis and I have been, writing about India and Sri Lanka, and a sociolinguist at University of Illinois, Rakesh Bhatt, asked us to write a piece about English, Indian languages, actually about English and advertising in India for, apparently it's going to be published in Oxford Handbook of English in South Asia. So this presentation is based on the chapter that Professor Davis and I wrote for him, and we're still waiting for feedback. He had some surgery, and I think he's working on it now. So it was new to me. I think it was new to Professor Davis. We're all familiar with Professor Choksi's work on multi-scriptality. I had done some work on language and script, but we had never taken a deep dive, as it were, into the social life of advertising in the history of India. And I have to say it was fascinating. Fascinating in part because of ignorance, and fascinating in part because the situation has changed. And it's changed drastically over time. So part of the approach here is historical, and so we'll see that. Advertising in India has a long history, a really long history, but the British colonial period was the beginning of advertising commodities, right? In other words, goods sold in that fashion that we would call commodity or commodification in India. And that means products offered as standardized and sold under a name or a brand. Things and services had been sold before this, of course, for as long as we have writing. And India became world famous for its mercantile practices, certainly. But the colonial period, the British colonial period, was the beginning of capitalistic incursions, eventually bringing an enormous advertising industry into being in India. Advertising in India can be categorized into 3 periods. And again, these periods have very fuzzy boundaries. I don't mean to imply that, from one day, a situation turned into another situation the next day. These are, you might call them ideal types. But certainly, one period is discernibly different from another. And these 3 periods correspond roughly to changes in the use and function of languages, English and Indian languages. In other words, the use and function in advertising. How does an advertising company or a manufacturing firm reach out to a constituency of customers in order to grab their attention and perhaps sell a product? The function of languages in that process has changed drastically, at least twice, giving us 3 periods. First, you have the British colonial period. And here, advertisements primarily used English. And after some time, a few decades, and the discovery of the potential for sales to Indian consumers, Indian languages with some English. So an initial period of English, then use of English with an Indian language. The early phase of this period stressed luxury items, items that were advertised as luxurious, while the latter period, or later period, saw advertising for soaps, detergents, and other common household items. And some of those ad campaigns continue today, but in an almost unrecognizable format, right? For example, Lifebuoy soap goes back to this period, but the way that it was advertised in the colonial period and the way that it's advertised now, you would, if it weren't the same product, you wouldn't know it. All right, independence. Legislation curtailed the British control of firms, and many more India-based companies began to advertise. There were Indian companies before independence, there's no question. But once independence occurs, you see a large growth in the number of Indian advertising companies. Advertise in English continued, but much more advertising was done in Indian languages. And more advertising included both languages, though kept relatively separate and sometimes parallel. Liberalization, something we've talked about in the course. 1991 brought the IMF, the International Monetary Fund loan, and massive deregulation in the Indian economy under Prime Minister Narasimha Rao and Finance Minister Manmohan Singh, later Prime Minister. One begins to see less separation of English and Indian languages, especially in products marketed to youth and the domestic sphere. Currently, advertising for youth is characterized by this. In other words, this has become the norm. And the current period now sees the simultaneous use of English and Indian languages in advertising for youth as the norm. In fact, nowadays, if you see anything beside this, you think it's sort of remarkable. This is true whatever the mode: print, radio, television, internet. All right, so here's a really racist advertisement this is a great book, by the way. I learned an enormous amount from it. It's entitled The Emergence of Brand Name Capitalism in Late Colonial India, Advertising in the Making of Middle-Class Conjugality. And it's published by Bloomsbury, which is nice. You know, they wanted to make their money, so it was $120 for the book for a while. And then it was, it's being released in paperback, and Bloomsbury is in Delhi, and so there is a book priced for the South Asian market coming out of this text. So it should be pretty reasonable. It's by Douglas Haynes, who's a professor of history over at Dartmouth. Over at Dartmouth means 2 hours drive from my house, so that's pretty close. The Boy's Misstep is the name of the advertisement. This is an advertisement for a company that is alive and well. If you've ever heard of Philips, right? This is that same corporation. And who is the boy? There's a much older man talking to a much younger woman. The boy is the older man, right? Why? He is her servant. And she is not just young, but how else would you describe her? European. Lovely. European. How can you tell? The hair, the face. Anything else? Body language and the dress. right? Just about everything. All right, and she says to him, can you all read it? I don't think so. I can barely read it. Let me see if I can. Yes. Where do you get these lamps? Caesar, just take them back. And then he says, oh, madam, and me having relied with the shop assistant. So agreed, sorry, something like my eyesight. Me having believed the shop assistant because I insisted on the same cheap lamps I saw in a window on Victoria Road, right? So he's sort of like apologizing for buying these lamps that he's got in his hand, and she's chastising him, right? So then she says, you're a good one, but I still want you to exchange these cheap things for Philips lamps, of course. And he says, but why, madam? And she says, because I don't want high electricity bills. What do I win by saving a few annas on the price of a lamp if that same lamp swallows terrific amounts of current? And he says, oh, madam, so that horrid man was right when he kept on saying that Philips lamps would save tens of rupees, though they were a trifle more expensive. All right, and then better light for lighter bills. That's their motto. All right, and here's the transcription. So there's a depiction of the British woman and the Indian man, clothes and hairstyle, which you all immediately pointed out. What do I win by saving a few annas on the price of a lamp if that same lamp swallows terrific amounts of current? He says, oh, madam, so that horrid man was right when he kept on saying that Philips lamps would save tens of rupees, though they were a trifle more expensive. Sorry for the typo. So what is so unequal about this exchange? The servant is calling her madam, the address term, of course. And the servant is gullible, right? And stubborn, gullible about his own. He needs to be taught. And he's stubborn, right? And what does he apologize for? For being naive, right? He needs her guidance, I think. And of course, who has to do all of the work? She inspects what he bought. Now he's responsible for going and fixing it. And the play of electricity in the background, who knows about such things? She does. He's in another world. All right, independence. For example, when Lifebuoy relaunched in a big way in 1960, this is from a delightful book, A History of Indian Advertising in 10.5 chapters by Ritu Singh, or Stark Raving Ad. She is someone who apparently was in a firm for many, many years, her entire career, and wrote a memoir about advertising in India. So notice about language here. Also, in this, any other language than English? No, right? Not a word, I don't believe. Annas, nice. That actually, yes. So the money, right? Annas and rupees. That's it, right? When Lifebuoy, this is from Ritu Singh, when Lifebuoy, anyone heard of Lifebuoy? I'm joking. Relaunched in a big way in 1964. Relaunched, why did they have to relaunch? Apparently the first Lifebuoy ad campaign was an utter disaster, right? The campaign was solve your BO problem. That was the campaign. Solve your BO problem. Immediately people asked, what is BO? What is BO? Body odor, right? And many people at the advertising firm itself told the person who coined the ad, not only does BO mean nothing, for example, in Gujarati or in Marathi, the main languages spoken by people who they were trying to sell soap to, not only does BO mean nothing, but body odor as a concept does not exist, right? So how is this advertising campaign going to be at all persuasive? That's the 1930s that's happening. And the ad campaign, sure enough, lasted something like a month before people began to respond to the newspapers. This is nonsensical, right? People read this and it doesn't have any audience. In 1964, Lever Corporation relaunched Lifebuoy Soap, and the song and dance, this is in her words, was around a sweaty, sporty guy lathering up to, and notice the language, Tandrushti ki raksha karta hai, Lifebuoy hai jahan, Tandrushti hai wahan. Keep a healthy Lifebuoy. Where there is Lifebuoy, there is health. And apparently in the ad, you've got the guy, without a shirt on, being showered with water, and he's got, suds all over him. And he's like dancing to this song. Who is being depicted here? Indians, right? An Indian is focal. You really don't see that before independence, right? Who's focal here? And who's bathing himself here, right? No colonial person necessary to tell him how to bathe, what soap to buy. All of that was of an earlier period, right? He can buy it himself. He can even sing a song while he's washing. And what languages get used here and how? And is there poetry in the usage? You bet. Jingles are a big part of Indian advertising.
I'm not sure whether it started in the 60s or whatever, but in the 90s, it got big.
Absolutely. Yes.
We are familiar with this jingle.
Yes.
And most of the jingles that we've heard in our childhood have stayed with us. So
yes.
many. They are difficult to forget.
Yes. It's quite effective. In fact, this jingle is 60 years old, right? Quite effective. And why? I know, not everyone in the class is into poetics, but rhyming. And what rhymes? Jahan, wahan, and any other repetition? Lifebuoy, right? Lifebuoy happens where in the first line? At the end. And where in the second line? At the beginning. It makes the jingle easier to remember and perhaps more effective. You bet, right? And one of those poetic devices relies on Hindi, and one relies on, who knows if Lifebuoy is English or Hindi, right? But let's say English. Certainly we can say there are two languages being used here, whereas in the colonial ads, the advertising campaign for Amul butter is the longest running in world history, right? The company was founded in 1946, but they didn't really have the ad campaign until they hired Sylvester da Cunha and his advertising company in Bombay in 1966. Apparently Eustace Fernandez created the Moppet, the little girl. She invented her. And she worked in the company. She was, I believe, I could have this wrong, she was a secretary in the advertising company, and she drew the cartoon, and they loved it. And da Cunha's wife, Nisha, coined the phrase utterly butterly, right? She came up with the phrase, told her husband ran to work, and history was made. A lot of history, as we'll see. The first topical advertisement of Amul butter was in 1966, right? This was it. Is the advertising playing with language? What's the play here? There's a pun. Yeah, does thoroughbred refer to the horse or to the? Yes, the bread is thoroughly buttered. In fact, for Amul's purposes, is the bread any good without butter? Oh yeah, it's a win-win. The bread becomes better with the butter, and the butter becomes better with the bread. And Amul is just parasitic on, anyway. So utterly butterly Amul, and the pun of thoroughbred. And is there anything else going on? This little girl riding a horse like a jockey? Could be, could be, absolutely. Yeah. Absolutely. Lovely. All right, Amul often uses Hindi, Bangla, Tamil, and other languages besides English. Doesn't use just English, right? But they more often than not use Roman script for the language. So more often than not, for the most part, we're going to see some exceptions, but for the most part, when Amul uses Indian languages, it uses Roman script. So here, har ghar Amul kar, right? And here, she's often depicted as pretty coy. Sometimes she's done even something a little bad, and she's not repentant at all. She's sort of enjoying her badness. Sound familiar? Right. All right. There are advertisements wherein an Indian script is used. So here, what is she standing in front of? Parliament, right, in Delhi. And what's coming out of the building? A chair. Yeah. Papers are being thrown. A chair, pens, shoes. So there's a big a microphone, right? A big fight is going on inside, and yet outside, hum sat sat, right? Amul, member of all parties. So, a little bit of a contradiction here. What's happening in the parliament? Yes. 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 Beautiful. It's also, borrowing a movie title of wide knowledge, and the movie is about harmony in the family. So a bit ironic. If the parliament is a family, right? And I think people are like climbing to get out of the building. It's quite a scene of total self-destruction, right? And a mule is a member of all parties. What is this? Maybe if they would all just eat buttered bread. Yes. And happen just once, or?
Maybe at some point, Amul became synonymous with some part. So that is reiterating that.
Or Parliament, is it known as a place where friendly family-like conversation happens?
Not in India, that's not what.
Yes, I think that's what's happened, yes. And maybe if everyone just was like a mule, everyone would get along.
So maybe being ironic.
Yes, very ironical. Very ironical. And a mule has gotten in trouble, time and time again over this period of time. And Fernandez himself was interviewed on television and got into further trouble. This happened about 20 years ago. He was asked, sometimes your cartoons are rather irreverent. And he said, yes, it's true. And they asked him, when have you actually gotten in trouble? And he said, it's really fascinating. He said, this is on YouTube. You can pull up this interview. He said, when we think that we've been punchy in the office, we don't get into trouble, like for this kind of thing. He said, when we touch religious affairs, Hinduism, Islam, Christianity, then we get into trouble. We get into really hot water when we touch any sort of religious stuff. So we've learned to avoid it over the years. And it is true. Amul's second ever topical advertisement was the Moppet sitting with her hands, saying the Lord's Prayer, and utterly butterly is worked into the Lord's Prayer. And Christians really did not like that and protested against the company. And then they ran some about, I believe, God-men was the term that they used in the cartoon in English, got into terrible hot water. And then I believe there was, this is way back in the 70s, some jokes on the prophet. They got into some hot water. He said, we've offended every religion, and they've really, that's when we hear it from the public. He said, we can put pretty irreverent stuff about politics, ethnicities, making fun. For example, some have made fun of Bengalis. Those are fine. Nobody cares. But we hear it when it's religious. And what do we notice about language and scripts here? Pretty obvious point. Old?
They all represent they all are the members of the family. And they're fighting and the girl is
Yeah, there is something about, just be youthful and you won't have these, be a youthful consumer.
you also have
Yeah.
in your
Yes, definitely. That could be part of it. And what about language and script? Are they mixed at all? I'll just call it mixed. The top is all Hindi, all Devanagari. The bottom is all English and all Roman. In other words, they're kept apart. And this particular ad came out in late 80s. Many advertisements by Amul. Here's your comment coming out. Invoke titles, names, and lines from popular media. So what is being done here? I had to see this movie 50 times, 60 times. And then once one group of school kids knew that I had gone to see it with one group, the whole school got in. So I just kept having to go. Yes. I saw it at Abhay Theater. I saw this film at Abhay Theater near Asikhat, if you ever visit Benares. I think it's still open somehow. 60 times at least. But I didn't know whether I liked seeing this one or Mora better. Mora was the film that boys wanted to go and see, and this was the film that girls wanted to go and see. You remember Cheese Birdie Head, Must. I think he's still around, isn't he? He has like a health club now, worldwide. Yes. All right. What's a little different about this one? Yeah, Roman script, all Roman script. So no Devanagari and Hindi and English. Finally, sorry, bad joke. This is what time period? Mid-90s, you begin to see using of English in an otherwise Hindi expression, right? And this begins to happen more frequently than not. And mid-90s is about when we see this happening.
Forgot the script also because they don't use it beyond 10th grade and they just shift to English as a script. So a lot of people, if these advertisements were in English script, would not even be able to read it. That's why it has to have that English.
All right. So we see this again. Lots of punning, lots of jokes, lots of parallelism. And English being used as a Hindi verb, which is, you know, now you just think that this is why I say this is a historical presentation. Now you think, yeah, of course. So Amul was not responsible for putting this out in a way that, you know, they did the others. All those cartoons, by the way, are archived by the company. Amul is obviously proud of these advertisements. You can access every single advertisement they ever put out online, which is a huge archive. What's happening here? What do we find on the left and what do we find on the right? Exactly the same thing. Almost down to like a word or two. Definitely. Yeah, you get half as much for the Hindi version. and you get twice as much for the English version. That's certainly true. I mean, in this particular case. Anything else? Definitely. Definitely. One is the milk and one is for chai. The terms for?
The terms and conditions as defined.
Yes, yes. The MRP, let me see if I can read it. Inclusive of all taxes, transportation and cooling charges included. Conditions apply. For any clarification, please contact us on, and then 2 mobile numbers are given. I'm sure someone just picks up immediately if you call those. On the second one, you do have the qualification, apropos of your comment, for the 500 milliliter, oh, sorry. Yeah, that's right. For the 500 milliliter version, rupees 20, 225 milliliter, rupees 10, right? Which is even a further sort of, yeah. And that's given only in the 1 liter version, right? And as far as I could find, there wasn't a 1 liter version in Hindi, in Devanagari. And yet on the badge itself, on the brand itself, in the middle of the bag, the Moppet is standing in front of it. Amul is in, as Professor Choksi was talking about, English in Roman script, Devanagari, Hindi. All right, liberalization. Some sectors of advertising, especially those sponsored by or related to the government, courts, police, schools, railroad, etc., continue to keep languages apart, and scripts are used such that they correspond, that's my word, but people do use a verb to denote the same thing, to the language used, as in the prior Amul ad. Some people in Benares, for example, use that expression sat to say the script and the language were together, and some people said like a family, right? But other sectors, especially those catering to youth, began to use English and Indian languages in the same utterance, such that now today, if you see anything otherwise, it kind of strikes you, I believe. This is the tidal wave. I'm sure Pepsi would be very, very happy with that description. Laher, wave. Do you all remember? Do they still do this? On 1 bottle of Pepsi, there was Laher, spelled in Roman script, right? It was a strange spelling, L-E-H-A-R. And on the other bottle was wave, right? Wave. That precedes 1998, when Pepsi launched Ye Dil Mange More. One of the largest ad campaigns to that point in Indian history, not longest running, the most intensive, capital intensive. Pepsi spent hundreds of millions of dollars on this ad campaign. And it's still going, right, today. Here, what is happening? Ye dil mange more. How do you translate it? What's that? Yeah, suddenly we have some recognizable people, to say the least.
Because it's not a product that you need in your day-to-day life like this. So how do you make it desirable to masses by associating with it?
Yeah, you know, what is milk? Who cares? What you really need is soda, right? Absolutely. Soda. And another thing is during this period, an advertising sort of survey was sent out. Do you recognize the image, the face of the prime minister, or the man on the left? Who got recognized? Yeah, everyone. I don't think a single person surveyed didn't know who this was. Prime Minister, right? And they were also asked, how do you know about this guy? And people said, well, he's an actor, but also Dil Mange More. People actually just repeated the line.
Also capitalizing on the industry that both of these icons represent.
Yes.
So like Shah Rukh Khan, he had a lot of movies that had their own thing in his
Yes.
movie. So that is highlighted and look at that one. The Pepsi icon.
Now watch what happens to love. Love here? What kind of love is this? Bromance. Can we say that these two invented bromance 20 years before it was ever a term? I didn't hear the phrase bromance until I was, much, much older than this, right? This is the love between friends, right? Very, very famous friends, but friends. This is the love between, now, 1998, 2004. Why does it happen in love? Why does what happen? Two men back to back, jocularly hanging out, so to speak. One man surrounded by sisters? Is this a familial kind of love? And in fact, he has lipstick, right? Who knows who planted it there? Maybe not even one of these. And borrowings in other media industries, like this 2004 film from Fourth Wall Productions. So this is 2004, and you can actually buy a mug now, made in China from some English company, right? A company based in London. What is it here? Would some super sophisticates say this is the revenge of colonialism? Why the crown? Whose crown is this? Poor thing. Now her son's crown.
So what I saw that was what people would relate to at the time. And then you bring in actors also because they have these movies which make a lot of money and they are very recognizable. Nowadays, people relate to movies such as this. So it is being the word from that. And also when it comes to the deliberate use of both the languages together, ye dil mange could have easily been or also, ye dil mange or aha. But that deliberate use, which was really popular, how youngsters talked in the late 90s and early 2000s, they did mix, they did both.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And very nice point. What is this called now? You mentioned it, meme. This is now a meme. So Ye Dil Mange More has been borrowed into another format, another genre of language. And then what does this also indicate about the movement of this phrase? Is it now an Indian thing at all? Is it, let's say, I know diaspora was there before, but is this only for people in the diaspora and India? Or is this now truly a worldwide commodity that anyone might buy? In fact, I came to know about this because a student from Boston who is, I'll just say it, very white, and her family heritage has nothing to do with India, was sitting there with a coffee cup in class with this on it. And I said, oh, wow, where did you buy this? She said, Amazon. And I said, oh, I said, why? May I ask? And she said, why not? It seemed cool. I said, do you know what it says? She said, no.
So I think globally now the advertising is happening. It's shifted to social media, right? So they have all sorts of algorithms to give us targeted ads, but at the same time, a lot of people globally are going to see these things. They might not even understand it, but they thought it was cool, so they bought it. So that's why the algorithm now is so precise, and we get targeted ads based on our information, based on our cookies and data. Because they, although they're using social media and everything, they still want to be able to advertise their products to the people to whom it is actually relevant.
Beautiful.
And I think what happened in the case of the movie is also very interesting to see, because this is the first time that we're seeing that a movie is basically stealing from the campaign of a commodity. So in a way, they are also saying our movie is also a commodity, and they're targeting it to the younger audience.
That's a beautiful point. You know, in the first instances, the campaign was borrowing from the world of the movies.
And
then you see the movie world borrowing from the campaign. That's a beautiful point. Things are just, yes, coming full circle, or we see a late form of capitalism where commodification has no boundaries. Yes. And on to this, where a student in upstate New York, who's not from upstate New York, to be honest, is buying this because it's something cool included in a meme, right? And without the meme, I don't think she would have bought it. Wonderful. All right, you guys, any comments? Just closing comments? After, we're gonna break for lunch, and after lunch, I haven't given you, these are pretty obvious examples, and I did that on purpose. After lunch, we want to ask you, just so you can prep in your mind, after lunch, we want to ask you to pull up some of your favorite advertising and consider to yourself what is being done with language, what is being done with script, and any other kinds of reflections you want to make about those advertisements. And one thing we'll consider is whether any of you pull up, for example, signboards of like official things, which is possible, but I doubt it. We'll see. Any concluding thoughts? We've got 5 minutes left. So basically, just to reiterate, you see a situation where languages really are kept separate. They're kept hierarchical, where English is dominant, schooling Indian languages. The metaphor that we had was the Mem Sahab, and she actually is called Mem Sahab. That's the only, it's not Hindi, it's actually a coinage in the colonial period by the British, actually. She is schooling, the place of vernacular languages. Then you get this independence period where actors shift, the focal point shifts, and so does language usage. And yet, script and code, or script and language, still is kept in a relatively separate sort of location, literally, in the ad. And to the period of liberalization, such that now you really do have this divide between what's the function of the advertisement and who is purportedly the recipient. You know, who's the viewer, who's the consumer.
It is also interesting that they had to do this thing because now they are advertising globally. It's not about region anymore, so they cannot use regional languages. It's not even about what's uniting a country at a moment of time. So now globally, what would make sense to, because how are you going to, there is no, like geographically, you cannot do this anymore. It has to be global like that.
And what you do can easily be snatched up elsewhere. And yeah, thank you.